This is a summary of the excerpt Arbitrary Social Values and the Linguistic Sign from Ferdinand de Saussure's book, Course in General Linguistics. Saussure begins by saying that most people think language is just a naming process where words correspond to things. He then says that one criticism of this idea is that it assumes an idea or thing already exists, and that language is simply assigning names for things. For Saussure, a word is not assigned to an object in the world. For example, we do not just assign the word horse to the physical horse. Instead, for Saussure, we create the mental concept of the horse and a sound for expressing that idea. Then we connect them in our mind. For Saussure, the linguistic sign has two parts, a conceptual image and a conceptual sound. For Saussure, this idea that there are two parts to a sign is very important, and as a result, he says that we need two new terms if we want to study signs. Saussure suggests that we use the word sign to mean both the conceptual image and the conceptual sound, and that what we should call the conceptual image the signified, and the conceptual sound the signifier. Saussure goes on to comment on the idea that he has just brought to our attention. He breaks his comments down into sections. The first section is called Principle 1, the arbitrary nature of the sign. The first thing Saussure says is that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary, and therefore the sign is arbitrary. For Saussure, since the sign is completely arbitrary, the language we use is determined by society. The second section is called the sign in the community. In this section, Saussure states that while the sign is arbitrary, individuals cannot change the signifier. The signifier is chosen by the community, and the individual cannot change it. Saussure goes on to say that it seems our language always seems to be inherited. For Saussure, a particular language state is always the product of historical forces, and these forces explain why the sign is unchangeable, i.e. why it resists any arbitrary substitution. Saussure then comments on how then does language change. He states that like any institution, tradition versus free action is an issue, and to answer how language changes, we need to discover why, in any given category, the forces of tradition is more influential than free action. It seems that Saussure goes on to suggest that it is the interaction between older generations and newer generations that prevents language change, and if new members of society were to be conscious of how language worked, they would choose not to change language because it is already useful for them. But Saussure says in order to explain the change of language over time, we have to take into consideration time. He says that an isolated individual over time wouldn't change their language. So his conclusion is that over time, communities make small changes which over years make a significant difference. He concludes that language is both arbitrary and not free for the individual to change. His third section is titled Linguistic and Social Values. Saussure begins by saying that since language changes over time, the study of signs is unique from other sciences, because for other sciences, the fundamental units of analysis aren't changing. But like the discipline of political economy, Saussure says the study of signs is concerned with equating the value of things of different orders. For Saussure, determining the value of a sign is crucial. For Saussure, signs have a signifier and a signified and a value. A sign's value is determined by the existence of other signs in the entire system. For example, the existence of $1 and the existence of $5 allows each to have a value because they are compared to each other. In conclusion, for Saussure, there are three parts to the sign, or four parts of a sign depending on how you look at it. There's the sign, for example, like a bike. Then there's the signifier, the sound our brain interprets. The signified is the image our brain conjures up when we think of a bike. And then the value that the bike has to other things in our language system.